Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is the encyclical. So the Pope hasn't had many, but it's an encyclical he came out with in December regarding the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And it's called On the Human and Divine Love of the Heart of Christ. Here's the look of the encyclical. It's a meditation. It comes close to almost reading like the Imitation of Christ. It's very, very profound, and it would be very, very beneficial to anyone who reads it as a meditation, something to masticar and really absorb, reading it almost meditatively, because it is so rich in what it provides, so rich in what the Pope shares on the Sacred Heart. Okay, so this is just the, not to get overwhelmed, this is the table of contents. So I'm giving you a back, oh, it's not showing. Hold on. Let me, 1 second. Let me get it back up. All right. Entertainment room. Tell me when you see it. There we go. Ahí está. Okay. Okay. So that's for benefit. Okay, great. So here's the table of contents, and it shows all the different sections of it. Bottom line, or in summary form, chapter 1 is the importance of the heart, and it's what you mean by the heart. So it's really looking at what do we mean by the heart of the person to start with. So you have a devotion to the heart of God. What does that mean? So the heart itself is part of the initial discussion. And it goes into a scientific, biological, anthropological discussion about the human person. So really important backdrop, because it sets up what God is doing. What God is doing by focusing in on his heart and sharing his heart with us. Then he shares with us actions of Christ in Scripture that are very powerful. What he does and how he interchanges with humans. He's teaching us what he wants us to do with others, with our fellow human beings. And then we go into his love and how he shared that love and how we share back that love. And the fact that he thirsts for us and we thirst for him, and how we share that in the world, what we receive and sharing it back into the world. We'll get into it much, much more deeply here. Okay, so in summary, we're going to talk about defining Jesus' heart, how he spoke and acted, the Trinitarian love, his thirst and how it gets quenched, the society of Jesus. So there's about half a chapter, and it's a beautiful connection and integration between the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the society of Jesus through several of the leaders of the superior generals of the Society of Jesus and the popes, and John Paul II in particular. John Paul II is everywhere throughout this encyclical, and how he's a fountain to us for us to pour out to others. So this first slide, it starts here and it ends here, right? In that it all is about he loved us first. And throughout the entire theology of the love of Christ and the love of God and the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and you look at the super saints, Saint Therese of Lisieux, Faustina, Saint Mary Alacoque, that went through all of these apparitions and relationship and dialogue with Jesus in a very profound way with his Sacred Heart. It starts with understanding that we don't have to merit Christ's love. That's a hard thing for us to understand. It's receiving. He loved us first. It wasn't that we had to love him in order for him to love us. And Christ's heart to us, so it's unmerited, undeserved, and it's unconditional, complete, and it's an outpouring to us. But what happens, right? So if he's giving completely of himself to us, why aren't things different? And why isn't there more devotion? Why aren't we closer to Christ ourselves? Well, the world, to begin with, is enslaved. And the world gets in the way of itself, blocking Christ's invitation and Christ's offering of himself to us. And we know this world very well, right? So we can all identify with this. It's superficial, phonetic, fast. We don't even stop to think or to know, ask this questions, why? Why this way? Why that? Interestingly, the youth is asking a lot of questions these days and searching very early on for that. And we're ending up insatiable consumers. We're enslaved to the marketplace. We're enslaved to the way the world works. And this last point, the underline, the world needs to discover the importance of the heart. So the Pope Francis is saying, let's begin there. Christ offers his love in a sacred heart. Let's discover the heart. The heart. Greek for cardia. It's an inmost part of the human being. We have doctors here, and animals and plants, right? At our focus, the heart is in the center of these beings, of creation of God. It's the center of the body, of the soul, and of the spirit. At the heart, it's the center of our desires, the center of our decisions. With body and soul, there is a center, and it's the heart. There is a way to describe the person and to relate to God at the very center, and it's at the heart. And we'll see how we can get caught up and do get caught up in looking at the person, mind, will, power, all of these different things. And throughout Scripture, you see references to the heart. Hearts burning within us. The deepest truth of who we authentically are at the core. And frequently each person has many layers above our true heart. So when we look at who am I, who are we should be asking ourselves, what's my heart? What's really in my heart? Do I love? Do I hate? Am I jealous? Am I mean? Am I critical? Do I really let God in? Am I thinking of others? Is it greater glory to me or the greater glory of God? Where is my heart, right? The heart does not lie. And we have many layers. The Pope shares this on top of our hearts that don't even allow our own selves to see our hearts as deeply as we need to and are invited to. And for example, in the book of Proverbs, we have to protect our hearts and be vigilant about it because from there flows everything. And we've heard that before. The things that come out of us, what we say, what we think, what we do, comes from the inner dwellings of the heart. And different things like dishonesty and deception, just like we can build good habits and build good things in character out of our hearts, we can destroy it. We can build bad habits, allowing vices to get in and following those and embracing them and fooling ourselves and having a very superficial set of activities that are service-oriented, nice to people, but below is there love, right? Is there truly love and to the depth? Pope Francis refers to the cookies his grandmother would make him, called mentirosas, right? And that's the example he uses. They look good on the outside, and his grandmother taught him this, but it's empty on the inside. And that's how we are as people, right? Sometimes we fill and focus on, like in Scripture, the outside of the cup. But we got to cleanse and focus on the inside of the cup. And what the Pope shares is, don't chase the world with it has to offer. Life has questions that are leading others to the heart. And we know this from the Society of Jesus. We know this from the spiritual exercises. So instead of running after superficial satisfactions and playing the role of, even for the benefit of others, we need to stop and think, and this is what he's sharing with the whole church. Who am I really? What am I looking for? What direction do I want to give to my life, my decisions, my actions? Why and for what purpose am I in this world? How do I want to look back on my life, etc.? Who am I for God? All these questions lead us to the heart. And the exercises are a framework for that. But the Pope, you see his Jesuit spirituality coming out in what he's inviting everyone who's reading it to look at that. But I look at this guy to the right, right? Missing the center reality of the heart of the person. The world, he gets back to that again in the document. He takes like 3 or 4 go-backs to describing the world. He calls it a liquid world. Technology, bombardment. No patience for the inner life. We don't have time for that. And we risk losing our center that way. And people are very confused and torn apart in society. We're dominated, look at social media, by a narcissistic, self-centered world becoming more and more heartless. And at the center of what's going on in the world is not at the heart of it, it's at the absence of the heart of it, right? Because we're lacking heart is at the root of what's happening in the world. And he goes into the anthropology. When in the world today, with all the positive psychology here spoken about, self-help books and ways to build virtue and all these different things, the heart, the center of the person, is often ignored. And you don't get the full context of the person. The modern day focus is in, sounds good, the reason, how the mind reasons, the will, right? Let's focus on you're saying yes and no. Let's focus on focusing in on what else comes with the will and freedom. And these focus in on human powers. Is all of these things are very surface level, focusing in on the person, so everything becomes more and more individualistic. The me, the my, the I, the freedom from everything, so I can just be free to myself. I don't want kids, I don't want to spend, I don't want a boss, I don't want to go into the office, I don't want a spouse, I just want to live forever. Just total freedom, resulting in total emptiness and total isolation. And this is the anthropology. And he's saying we have to work towards the essence of the person, and only the heart has intimacy with others. And we'll get into that. The heart is what drives, but if you have no heart, what's driving? What's driving and who's driving who? So there's a limited and diluted understanding of the human person, to go a little bit further. So in the digital world, there are algorithms that show that thoughts and the will are more uniform. So the science is showing, hey, more than ever, we're realizing that people are more aligned, right, in their thinking and the way computers think, right, and how they take different circumstances and logically process through it, which makes things very predictable and also easily manipulated. Look at the behavior science that has driven and led to social media. That's behind all of that. Very, very scientifically designed and manipulated. But that's not the case with the heart. You can't predict the heart that way. You can't manipulate the heart that way. No computer is going to be able to ascertain the heart, right? It cannot be exhausted by biology, psychology, anthropology, or any other science. The heart is so unique. The heart connotes the wholeness and the core and the full integration of the person. And at the heart of the heart is love. And computers can't love, algorithms can't love, they can't love for you, no matter what they look like and how human they look and how well they reason, they can't be human. I'm not going to go through all of this, but it's really cool what he does in the book. He takes Mary and says she saw things from her heart, and she pondered them in her heart. And he goes deep into the significance of Mary and pondering in her heart. Pondering, when you go back to the root word, means putting two things together. So Mary took the past of how her parents raised her, her prayer, what she knew from Scripture, what she saw her parents do with the present moment, what God presented to her. That was the pondering that she was doing. And she kept it. She kept these things in her heart. Now, the next thing he goes to is artificial intelligence. It's the opposite, right? It doesn't ponder. Love is necessary, he's saying, to save our humanity, and no algorithm is going to be able to do that. He says the artificial intelligence can't remember and even factor in that when we were little, and this is the Pope's experience, that fork, that you use to dig into that pie your grandmother made, when you see something that reminds you of that, that affects your heart at that moment, right? Being in the kitchen and smelling the foods that you see, the smiles that you see in people, the jokes that you remember, the sketches, the soccer games you played with a ragged out ball, the worms you put into a can, the little flowers that you picked for your mother, the bird that you saved that had fallen down and was dying, and you brought it to life, and the wish you made by blowing out a daisy. These are the examples he uses that are the ordinary but extraordinary things that speak to and form the heart with beauty, with love, with kindness, these little acts that will never be captured by any algorithm, right? So that's the contrast. And it's not solely of the soul, but of the whole person when you're speaking about the heart, the psychic. He calls it the psychosomatic identity. So he's giving some instruction here on who a person is as distinguished from how people are defining people today, very superficially, right? They're basically equal to a computer. You can almost, not tell the difference when we put the Neuralink and the this and the that in the humans, and that's why you're talking about transhumanism. And the Pope is saying, no way. You'll never be able to replicate a human. A computer, no matter how many parts you put onto a human will never be a robot, and a robot will never be a human, right? Because at the center of it is heart and is love. Do I have a heart? So these are some of the deeper questions. A lot of times we get stuck in the mind, right? Seeking God in truth leads to fulfillment for a human being. In loving, we find our purpose, goal, and existence. So in contemplating meaning for ourselves, when you hear people all the time, you see it in different studies, whether it be by Harvard or Stanford, or whether it be by the latest Atomic Habits book that's out there, very popular, or whatever the other positive psychology book is. A question is, well, what's meaning? And where do we find meaning? And the question the Pope is saying we need to ask, if you're going to get there, is do I have heart? And we were talking about. So all of these have implications in the spiritual life. And at the heart of the spiritual exercises, he references San Ignacio. He brings us to affection. He brings us to love. When you look at the progression of the exercises, he's taking us to encounter Christ, heart to heart, Christ to Christ, and offer ourselves to him. He's bringing us to have lágrimas, tears, compunction of what we've done, having this inspiration to want to go on mission and to love Christ and represent him in the world with courage, with sacrifice, and this inspiration out of love. And at the heart of the exercises is to bring us to the affection of that. So it's really beautiful. And that's the structure around it. And when we go through the exercises, it's this desire to rearrange your life. And that's consistent with arranging it in alignment with what's coming out of your heart, right? The rules are in the service, all the rules of St. Ignatius, to help structure the heart and help build the heart for all of this. And there's an inbreaking through the exercises of this desire of receiving God's desire for us and what he wants to do through us and our desire for God. So it's very, very powerful. And he has here in St. Bonaventure told us and tells us we should not pray for light. We should pray for a raging fire. So when we ask, God, inspire me with light, enlighten me with my mind to see things clearly, he's saying, no, you're praying wrong. Pray for a raging fire, right? To go out with a raging fire into the world. This passion, this zealousness, it's way different. We can all relate to Llorente, right? It's a very different thing. When he says adelante, it means something. It means that fire all wrapped up. So knowledge to affection. We saw that picture, the famous picture of St. Augustine, right? That first he was thinking through everything, but it wasn't reaching his heart. So he takes his heart out, right, of that famous picture that he's got to bring it down to the heart. And it does come down to the heart for him. Just like Mother Teresa said, the longest road in the world is between the mind and the heart. So John Henry Newman, he shared this really beautiful. Beyond our thoughts and ideas, the Lord saves us by speaking to our hearts from his sacred heart. Not from reading and reflection. That's supportive, clearly, but in prayerful dialogue, heart to heart in the Eucharist. So that's the deeper invitation. The other parts are steps to that. But what we need to focus on and bring ourselves to is that dialogue, heart to heart, that deep love with Christ. O most sacred heart, most loving heart of Christ, I worship thee with all my best love and awe. O make my heart beat with thy heart. And these are beautiful words of someone's heart speaking to Christ. To speak that way and have that relationship with Christ is really beautiful. I'm not going to go through all of these. The world needs heart to change. That's his emphasis, though. We have to be able, if we're going to fix the world is going to grow from where it is. It needs heart, and it needs to change from the heart. The fourth one down, our hearts united with Jesus Christ can work the social miracle of changing the world. The imbalance in the world is a symptom of a deeper imbalance rooted in the human heart or the lack thereof. And he goes into, pulls out some of what Vatican II spoke about, very specifically about this, and the heart. And so it's really beautiful. Christ is the heart of the world, and everything he did for us that we're going to be celebrating and experiencing through Holy Week, brings us through that. And then he shares with us where we find Christ in Scripture and all the things he did. He came to us as a baby. He sought out and encountered people. He dialogued with people. He healed people. He taught people. And he shared with us what he wanted from us. No, I don't want your sacrifices. I desire mercy with each other. And his gaze, just by looking, and the tenderness and gentleness and the way he looked at people in the eye, if we were to imitate that, right, that raises people up. And the cross is the most eloquent of that. So here you have the heart that so loved. So you have the symbol of the heart. And what the Pope is saying, the heart leads you to Christ. It's a symbolic. It's what points you to the beyond of what you're praying, and thinking of is Jesus, right? Jesus is, but the actual Christ, fully present, is in the Eucharist. There, you're worshiping, you're loving, you're adoring Christ in the Eucharist. His sacred heart, his whole being in the Eucharist. An image of the heart is not the whole Christ, right? The Christ, everything about him, his eyes, the way he touched, the way he looks, is all part of God's evangelization to us, right? So that we understand when we're in our relationship with Christ and we're thinking of him and growing with him, it's his wholeness. And on this earth, nothing more intimate than in front of the Eucharist with him, to really just pour our hearts out and to speak to him in that loving way beyond anything we've ever even spoken to our wives, to our, our family, to our children, to speak to Christ in that greatest profoundness, like you're speaking in paradise, like Padre Pio would speak, which is so beautiful, and you get to a different level of what Christ is inviting us to and asking us to. I'm only going to cut out the theme here. I'm not going to go through these. But there became, for us to experience and to redeem us. That's why he came. And so when he came through, presented himself, and this is a statue of Saint Mary Alacoque in Notre Dame in France, and light was coming in at that time, and it's pointing to the Sacred Heart at that moment. It was only for a few seconds. But you have her experience and apparition with Christ, the way he spoke to her, shares with us how he wants us and how much he's looking in the world to be more in our lives and more in the world. But we don't let him. We only let him go to certain depths, right? How do we go deeper with him? And that what the love he receives, he takes it to the Father. And this is all connecting that Trinitarian love. So I won't go into it now. It's to introduce you to it, right? So that you can meditate on it and you can read through the encyclical, and there's a lot to be able to learn and draw from in that relationship in the Trinitarian love. And the Holy Spirit's fire then comes and fills Christ's heart, and all of it is centered in the heart. The time with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, we know this, right? And Padre Rojas shares that with us. He brings it out, very devout with that. And we always have the Blessed Sacrament with us here in the ACU. We have to nourish ourselves with the Eucharist. I remember years ago, we've shared this in here, John Paul II shared, I think it's still one of the largest gatherings ever in the world. It was the World Youth Day in Rome. 6 million people, 5 million people, the youth, massive amount of numbers. And he's sharing with everyone the secret to your lives is to center your lives around the Eucharist. So simple. Okay, that either is the secret, and it's that simple, or it's not. And if it is, right, how can we center our lives more around the Eucharist, which is actually God who is there? And we have that devotion to him. Jesus, I trust in you, captures all of that. He uses this amazing imagery. There's maybe half or a third of the encyclical, this metaphor throughout of rivers and fountains. And he brings about the Old Testament and all the prophecies that have been fulfilled through the rivers and oceans and fountains in the New Testament and in the apparitions, etc., with the Old Testament, brings all of these together because that's how the love works. It's that much of an outpouring. It's that much of a love. And you look at the fountain, it's faded in the background, but that love from Christ pours into us and pours into others and pours into others and pours into others, which pours into Christ and pours out into others. And it's this overflowing and dwelling of an ocean of sorts that's all connected to Christ's love. St. Augustine speaks very beautifully about that. But this all comes from his sacrifice on the cross and that piercing of his heart that gushed forth the water and the blood. These are saints, all the saints in one chapter that the Pope listed out, just to show you an example. I'm not going to walk through them. But he spoke about each of these saints. And in the later chapters, there's actually paragraphs on several of these saints and looking at their devotion, how they got that devotion with Christ and how that had impact on their lives and the mission of what they have done, and how we're invited to do the same. So the Pope is saying there's another level, everyone. Many levels. It's there. It's for the taking. This is how you do it. This is how you grow closer to Christ. This is how you grow closer to devotion to his Sacred Heart. And there's some examples of the saints down here. St. Mary Alacoque, as I said, Jesus spoke how his divine heart was so inflamed with love for men, but they weren't receiving it. And her spiritual director was a Jesuit. And St. Claude Colombre reflected how much Christ took on and bore for us, and this was very connected to what he ended up doing in his life and how he lived out the exercises. We know this very well. St. Therese, the little flower, her littleness, the little way, it's so powerful. So in her paragraph, she's like, look, what we need to have in the spiritual life is so simple. We need to have confidence, not out of ego or not out of entitlement. On the contrary, we have to recognize, and we just don't do it because we feel we have to merit it, right? And she's saying, no, Christ's love is greater than that. And all we have to accept is that we're unworthy and recognize, yes, we're unworthy, and God's okay with that. He inviting us through that. Of course we're unworthy. We're not worthy of his love to the extent he's giving it to us, but he's giving it to us. But we have to accept it or we can't receive it. He's giving us a gift. But if the gift is like, no, I'm not good enough to receive it, right? It's like someone saying, I don't want to be a Eucharistic minister because I'm not worthy to. No one's worthy. So the one who is a Eucharistic minister at Mass is worthy. The priest who's celebrating the Mass is worthy. Nobody's worthy. That's exactly what the Pope is sharing. That's good news. Because we're all broken. There is no perfect person. So we're all invited to that same depth of St. Therese of Lisieux, right? And we're being invited, and she's helping us to go there. It's all that merciful love, but we have to approach it with that confidence. And we're talking about the deathbed. To never doubt and to go with confidence and humility with those two wings and accepting that. accepting his mercy. Ignacio and the Society of Jesus. There were several letters. Peter Faber, Father Polanco, who did the biography, speaking to the colloquies and the dialogue that Ignacio shared, that all of us benefit from, was all about that heart-to-heart with Christ. And I mentioned this before, the progression of the exercises. Down here is a listing of many Jesuit priests that the Pope lists that spoke and wrote about different devotions to the Sacred Heart. Here is La Reina, right? So maybe Efrain, it might look familiar to you, or anybody who's been there in Cuba, pictures that Padre Rojas has shared. Luis, I don't know if you've gone or at any point in that particular church, but there's devotion to the Sacred Heart all over the world, right? And this is one in Cuba, in Havana. Jesuit devotion to the Sacred Heart. So there's been, bottom line, the Society of Jesus committed to the duty to practice and promote devotion to the Sacred Heart back in 1883, and there was history before that. Then there was a consecration, a reconsecration of the Society of Jesus to the Sacred Heart. And Rupe doubled down on that in 1972, and then John Paul II tripled down on that. And John Paul II saw the connection between the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, that devotion, spreading it, and the charism of the Society of Jesus. So John Paul said, you are the guys. You're the order that has to spread the Society of Jesus. From its very founding, you are that movement in the world. You are made to be the promoters and implementers and evangelizers and livers of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Similar saintly devotion, St. Vincent similarly said that what God wants is our hearts. He primarily asks for our heart. That is what counts. He wants that unity of our heart and his heart. So we start praying to God and asking, what do you want? It's the heart. And how are we giving him our hearts? And you can name Padre Pio. I mentioned Padre Pio, Mother Teresa, Sister Faustina, with the Divine Mercy, which we know, all of us know that. It's very well promoted because of John Paul II. And he has had this since his youth. Then there's different aspects of union with the heart of Christ. We just got one more slide, and we'll wrap up and we take any questions or whatever. But there's a couple more chapters throughout the encyclical that go in great depth into consoling the heart of Jesus. So there's still suffering that's going on. As long as the world is broken with all its wars, all its tragedies, all its corruption, all its evils, there is continuous need to consolidate, to console, and to be in union with Christ on the cross. Some of these saints have gotten to the point of offering up suffering, unifying in different ways and say, Jesus, I seek to build up society in a spiritual way like St. Therese of Lisieux did. I can do that in the way that you invite me. Compunction, to really have tears for what we've done or failed or not done. And then extending the love we receive from Christ, how are we going to extend that with others? How are we going to bring that Sacred Heart devotion to others? The importance of fraternity. And you go back to how do you share that with others? They're going to be celebrating Holy Week. Ignacio, right? Carlos Acutis, in what did he do? He brought to the world digitally knowledge. He brought from taking out of mystery and bringing it to the forefront, the Eucharistic miracles of Christ, Sacred Heart of Christ. And so there's the other aspects. Fraternity with one another. The world is missing brotherhood. The world is missing sisterhood. The world is missing union, solidarity with our poor, with our suffering, etc. We're so isolated. We're so comfortable at times. We're so unaware. I met a priest a couple weeks ago at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. He was there with a bishop from Nigeria last year and spoke. And this year, J.D. Vance remembered them and spoke about these priests. The suffering is incredible of what they're going through. And he said, our biggest problem is that no one cares and no one knows, right? He had just had a friend of his who was here in the United States in New Jersey, had gone back to Nigeria to help the bishop there. He got kidnapped the same day. He's currently still under kidnap. His friend Thomas, Father Thomas, if you can pray for him, in Nigeria. And they just declared it the most anti-Christian place in the world right now, is that section of Nigeria. And he says, look, we all go to Mass, and we know we're at fear of death. The synod, that famous synod, the reports and the synodality, if you look at the global report, it's really impressive. It's about 40 pages. And if you read that, you're going to get inspired that the church is alive. You're going to be a little bit underwhelmed with the United States, although many good things are happening here, like the Eucharistic Congress and things like that. But it was kind of dry compared to the rest of the world. Give you two statistics that represent that. In the United States, where there is no fear of death for going to Mass, 17% of Catholics, 17% of Catholics go to Mass on average in the United States to Mass. In Nigeria, where there is fear of death every day to go to Mass, there's 97% participation in Sunday Mass. What does that tell you, right? What does that tell you? So that is very, very powerful. And the aspects of reparation, that's another depth of spirituality worth reading. Solidarity, forgiveness, healing. Healing happens. It exists in the world today, and God is there to help heal. Not always in the way that we're thinking, deeper than that, right? He's bringing us to where he's at. And mission. Mission requires missionaries who are in love with Christ. And out of that love is what brings about all of this fire in the world for serving others, for sharing Christ into the world. And it was an interesting point that he made. He said, but remember, with all of this fire and all this energy, etc., remember how Christ did it. Meek and humble of heart, treating people with gentleness, not harshness. There's a lot of that in the church, even to get people to go to church or to think to attract them with like arguments and theories and apologetics and all of that, which are all necessary. But what attracts the most is love. What attracts the most is gentleness with people, invitation, being there for them, softness. That's how Christ did it. Not harshness, not proselytization, not being sharp. So we got to catch ourselves, even within the ACU or in our parishes or in our families or in our communities. Are we being gentle or are we being military, right? Are we being sharp? Are we being harsh? Or are we imitating Christ in his way of in bringing in and inviting by how we love and really help people and be there for them in little ways? And the last slide here is, actually one more after this. Devotion to the Immaculate Heart leads to the Sacred Heart. We know that. And just like the moon, we're going to see, which is almost full outside, she doesn't take away, right? Anything we see in her is reflected from him. That light of the moon is not its own light. It's the light from the sun. But it shows us that the sun is there and takes us to the sun. And it's a little easier, right, to go through the sun and to go to Jesus. And she's there as our mother throughout always, never to forget that. And this is the last slide, right? So the victory of the Sacred Heart is going to happen. I love, of all the pictures of the Sacred Heart, this is one of my favorites. And this one is in also in France. This is in Montmartre there at the Sacred Heart. And John Paul II, I mean, he's remarkable in this encyclical, how much Pope Francis brings John Paul II in here throughout. John Paul was in everything, and he's really deep on the Society of Jesus in this encyclical. Really beautiful with San Ignacio. There's a section there where John Paul II says, we got ruins. Right now we're living in ruins, and we're going to build this way on top of the ruins a civilization of love. This is our ground. This is the land we're building the new world on, the new kingdom on, through the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That's how we're going to do it. And then this Sacred Heart is just so powerful. It's like the world, I got this. Anybody who's tired, fighting, we're in battle, I'm the master, I'm the king, I'm always in control, most powerful, no one compares. I've got this. I'm the king of the cosmos, I'm the king of the world, I'm king of heaven. I've got this. and you devote yourself and you give yourself to my sacred heart, and you see others in this particular image giving him things, giving him the world, giving him their service, giving them their love and the Holy Spirit coming down. This is so celestial. Like, you could see heaven like this, where it's just this victory, right? This conquest, this full reveal, right? This full explosion of paradise, just this explosion. He's there, and we're going to see his sacred heart like that, his whole being, and everything that ever happened, ever was, all come together. This really wraps it up as this is the victorious Christ that we're living in today and with today, in, with, and through him. But the encyclical is so deep. It's a meditation, and I highly recommend. Came out again in December, so it's available now on Amazon and all of that, so you can get it really easily. And you can download it, of course, for free on the Vatican website and go through it and just piece it through. But it's a nice, read a couple pages, 5 pages a night over the period of a month or so. And it's a nice way to go through Lent. It'd be a nice thing to read. So shared a lot there. There's a lot more. I tried to synthesize it. So sorry to go through it so quickly. But any questions or anything anybody wanted to share? It's very much an educational document that he shares and a spiritual document. It's kind of like the imitation of Christ almost, that he's...
Did you say that's Montmartre?
That's in Montmartre. In Paris. On top of the hill, looking down at Notre Dame, kind of thing. It's really beautiful. We had a lot to do, but you see it happening in the world where Christ is in control, and some big things are happening, despite all the bad things that seem to be happening. The bigger good things are happening, and if we give our hearts to him, we're guaranteed, right? Especially through Mary, we're guaranteed. And we have the benefit, and the Pope is saying, hey, well, extra special good is going through the Society of Jesus. I mean, he didn't make any qualms about that, as this Pope, and God does have him as Pope right now at this time in the world.
Were you at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast?
Yes, a couple weeks ago.
Any other agrupado?
No.
I suggested someone here that maybe we should put that YouTube on the screen, maybe not the full 2 hours, but maybe different segments. I think it's very powerful.
It was good. I have a few videos that are short, like a minute or so each. Monsignor Shea was super powerful, speaking on hope. J.D. Vance did a great job. He spoke as a Catholic. I don't think they've had a Catholic, certainly not president or vice president, speak there. They had Pence, who's not Catholic. J.D. Vance spoke really beautifully. He spoke about our goal is to, in saying it himself, right, speaking out there, and it is the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. He said that our goal is to not focus on prosperity at the monetary level, that we're looking at the fullness of the person, their well-being, their safety, their health, the sanctity of marriages and supporting marriages, and the flourishing of the human person, and having a society like that. That's what he said, right? And so people were blown away by that. Eduardo Besterrigui, he spoke very well, and he did his Viva Cristo Rey, Viva Mexico, at the end. They had a lot of people that were really influential. The football player Harrison Butker was there. He got an award, nice guy. And they had some other politicians there. Chris Smith, who's been in it for 30 years, spoke unbelievably about a conversation he just had with the head of the UN. And the head of UN, his number one thing is starvation. And he said, let me tell you something. You care about starvation? Do you know how the abortion pill works? It starves the infant in the womb. That's not consistent. So for a man who's representing worldwide that you're about hunger and you're okay with the abortion pill, you're completely inconsistent. And this guy's on fire. I mean, he's 30 years in, looks like he's ready to go another 30 years. It was really beautiful. It's great to have him in there. So you had all this representation. You had several sisters that are involved in things. A few years ago was Cardinal Sarah that spoke very beautifully. So it's wonderful to see that you have different, different leaders coming together regarding policy and the fabric of the country. It's a good thing. And a lot of, business leaders and stuff like a lot of the private sector and the government sector there together.
Es un llamado universal, nosotros, Padre nuestro, o sea, entonces el contexto de este gran contenido de lo que significa el corazón y el sagrado corazón de Jesús, ¿qué me llama a mí a hacer hacia otros, verdad? Porque yo tuviera cuidado, yo, y cada esto pues ya son opiniones personales, en citar a ciertos de los personajes que has mencionado como que si son la brújula de lo correcto y de lo que involucra a todos dentro del Padre Nuestro, que somos pues todos, no solamente el católico, no solamente el que estuvo en el desayuno, no, porque el llamado de nuevo es dentro de todo lo que está sucediendo, ¿qué estamos llamados a hacer para ese universo de lo que quiere decir el nuestro? No solamente el católico, no solamente el que viene a las reuniones que estamos acá, sino que what are we doing? O sea, con el contexto de el Sagrado Corazón de Jesús y la conexión de la mente, la metanoia en la mente y el corazón, que cuando están en sintonía, pues es un drive prácticamente de santidad. Entonces quería hacer ese comentario, ¿verdad? Porque algunos de los personajes que mencionaste están muy bonito hablando de ciertas cosas, pero a la hora de la acción no necesariamente para mí es el llamado del Padre Nuestro y el pan para todos y un beneficio para todos.
And that's what the Pope is speaking about, right? Is for us to do that exact thing, that solidarity. It's exactly what he's calling for.
Last question. Okay. I'm just curious. Did the Pope, regarding the revelation of his Sacred Heart, which started with Margaret Mary of Alacoque, did he, in his encyclical, did he alluded to the progression and as to how over time he revealed more and more of his heart, especially with Sister Faustina? I mean, if you read Sister Faustina's diary, it blows your mind. Did he link the different stages of how Christ over time
Yes.
exposed more and more of his heart?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a progression in there. And then his Sacred Heart, even pre Saint Mary Alacoque, is shared within the encyclical. So absolutely, there's more outpouring, more sharing, and through the lives of the saints, he revealed himself a lot more. John Paul II, right? You look at that, and Saint Therese of Lisieux, that spirituality and that understanding has come more and more through progression. And you can imagine through modern day media and everything else, now everything, can be shared in ways it could never be shared before. So even back then, there was more communication channels and travel and everything else to be able to spread the devotion. But the answer is yes. He does go into a progression, and there's been more and more of, and also souls have accepted it and drawn him to them because of how they have responded to his Sacred Heart. Like,
But what is impressive, let me tell you one of the things that impressed me the most of all the things that you said, it was that the Pope
Absolutely.
He said, and I was impressed that he made that point.
He did. And then in January, his dicastery released, it's about 40 pages, maybe it's 50 pages, on artificial intelligence. So they have a very recent, came out in January, document that goes much more deeply into that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Willie.
Yeah, thanks for having me, you guys.
We're getting to the cutoff time of 9:30, but I'd like to comment that we need to feel proud that we have a young fellow like Willie, that he's learning deep into what is our religion today, the challenges it faces, as well as the Vatican's, and I mean by that the Pope's writing about it. Not all of us are as well educated on that subject as he is, and I'm very proud that we have within the ACU such a wealth of knowledge. Thank you very much.